Hey, Sam camera framing 2 videos in a row because I was too lazy to move the camera for this one. Anyway, oh Lord have mercy. So, something that commonly pops up, I actually have seen this a few times on Reddit and on Twitter and even in a few comment sections, including my own, where people often ask, why are there so many DM tips on YouTube and not as many player tips videos? Well, today I'm going to answer that for you. Let's talk about it.
Riser, double.
I take how much damage? So the big thing that people are talking about is that every single tip video related to Dungeons & Dragons basically has to do with helping the Dungeon Master prepare for a session or run certain encounters or advice even on just generally being a Dungeon Master. But there's very little videos out there for players, how to build better backstories, how to roleplay easier, or things like that. I myself have taken a stab at player tips and I do plan to do even more in the future, but it is something that is a little bit easier to do for Dungeon Masters. One of the main reasons that there's so many dungeon mastering tips out there is because when it comes to the relationship between the players and the dungeon master, there's a lot more work on the dungeon master's part. And it shouldn't be too much of an argument that that is the case. I mean, as players, once you get past the backstory session, your biggest job is role-playing and following what the DM puts in front of you. There's not a lot that goes into being a player on a session-to-session basis. Most of the time, whenever you as a player are being a player, you just kind of do the things that you need to do. And your biggest commitments are going to be what you take whenever you level up if you're a spellcaster. And that's pretty much it. Maybe you're going to have some sort of input on, you know, whether or not you want your character to go a certain way or multi-classing or things like that. But in terms of actual responsibilities as a player, show up and don't be a jackass. But as the Dungeon Master, you have so much more under your belt. You need to plan every session, even if it is a simple outline. You need to take every single player into account. If you want to be a good Dungeon Master, then you also want to write your players' backstories into the story that you're currently telling. Whether that be homebrew or a predetermined supplement, you want to have your players feel like they're, you know, actually important to the world instead of just little pawns that you move along a story path. If you want to control every single event and every single character, write a fucking book. But you also kind of are writing a book, just not a fully fleshed out one. The Dungeon Master has to make plans for everything from the beginning of the campaign to the end. While it's not necessary to plan out every single session, unless you're doing like a very short campaign, like a 10-session campaign or something, you're mostly going to be trying to plan out, okay, where do the players start? What do I want them to accomplish in the climax? And who do I want the BBEG to be? On top of that, the Dungeon Master also has to make sure that they have all the resources that they need, and if it is an in-person game, a lot of times the Dungeon Master is the one that provides the mat and the miniatures and things like that, so they have to bring and haul all that stuff with them. The Dungeon Master is also responsible for making sure that there is balance within the game. They're throwing different encounters at you, whether that be combat or roleplay, and they want to make sure that every player feels important. They also want to make sure that you're not just raffle stomping your way through things, so they can't just throw a handful of cultists or bandits at you every so often and call it a day. No, they need to do things like maybe a false hydra or a beholder. They need to make things exciting, so the Dungeon Master also has to learn how to do things like voice act as many characters as they possibly can and make descriptive scenery. I can't just tell you you'll walk into a cave. I mean, I can, but it's not going to be a very thrilling experience. So I have to be like, you walk into a cave, you hear the steady dripping as water comes from the ceiling, and the cave reeks of mildew and death. You see a small rat scurry across the floor, and the bones of a long-dead adventurer lays against the wall next to you. You have to do these kind of things, or, well, you want to do these kind of things as a Dungeon Master if you want to feel like a good Dungeon Master. And so a lot of the times there's just more stuff to talk about when it comes to to giving advice to the dungeon master. Even when comparing all of the different types of tip videos you can make, for every player tip video, there's an equal dungeon master tip video. What I mean by that is, for player tips, we might do how to build a backstory, how to roleplay, and how to roleplay this specific class. But then the dungeon master, on top of all the other tips like running a session and planning travel and writing a story and all of this other stuff, they have all of that down here. But on top of that, they'll have how to incorporate your player's backstory, how to react to your player's role playing, and how to run a campaign with this particular class in that campaign. So every time the player has a tip that you can have, there's an equal tip for the dungeon master in terms of running those tips that are related to the players. So the dungeon master just naturally has more stuff stacked on top of it, and the player can never really catch up in all of the different subjects that you can make. On top of that, most D&D tubers are dungeon masters, and that's because of the Forever DM meme. Like I said, being a dungeon master is a lot of fucking work, and because of that, a lot of players give up on being a dungeon master pretty fucking quickly. And so for a lot of people, they become dungeon masters for the rest of their lives. And if you're very experienced in Dungeons & Dragons, experienced enough to start making content around it, the chances of you being a forever DM are pretty fucking high. XP to level 3, Pointy Hat, DM Lair, the Dungeon Dudes, Nerdarchy, Crispy's Tavern, Ginny D, and more are all people who are dungeon masters, and they're pretty heavily and significantly dungeon masters because they've been playing this game for so long. They naturally fell into that role because most people who have been playing the game for a long time and have the amount of knowledge around it become dungeon masters. And again, you are always and forever a dungeon master. I really hope that one day this channel takes off and somebody and another D&D tuber invites me to be a player in their game so I can be a player again. And generally speaking, the reason that you're not going to find as many player tip videos as you will DM tip videos is because there's just so much more ground to cover with dungeon masters. It's not necessarily that we don't want to make player tip videos or that player tip videos are harder to make. It's just that when you're sitting down brainstorming your next video idea, you're almost guaranteed to come up with something for dungeon masters over coming up with something for players, and that's just simply mathematics. But I will let you know that I don't want to be that kind of person. So I have a group of bullet point documents that I have set up for player tips that I will be working on in the future, and I'll try to be giving you guys at least one player tips video a week until I run out of ideas. So I hope you guys are prepared to that, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, let me know what you think down below. And as always, I love you guys so much, and I will see you in the next one.